There's a strange paradox at the heart of education. Two students sit in the same classroom, hear the same lectures, read the same textbooks. One struggles and forgets everything by exam day. The other seems to absorb knowledge effortlessly and recalls it months later. What separates them isn't intelligence or study time, it's something far more fundamental, the way they think. Most of us were never taught how to think. We were taught what to think about. Sure, history dates, chemical formulas, mathematical theorems, but the actual cognitive process, the mental architecture that determines whether knowledge sticks or fades, that was left to chance. And because of this gap, millions of students are climbing the wrong ladder entirely. Imagine your mind as a building with 6 floors. Most students spend all their time on the ground floor, never realizing there are 5 more levels above them where the real learning happens. Today, I want to take you on a journey through these 6 floors. And by the end, you'll understand why the students who seem to learn effortlessly aren't working harder, they're simply thinking from a different altitude. Asterisk, asterisk, the ground floor, the illusion of productivity, asterisk, asterisk. Let's start where most students live, the realm of memory. This is the world of highlighters, flashcards, and endless rereading. You know the routine. Sunday evening arrives, and you spread your notes across the desk. Yellow highlighter for important points, pink for very important, orange for critical. You read the same page 3, 4, 5 times. You write definitions on index cards. You quiz yourself before bed. And here's the thing. It feels productive. Your notes look beautiful. Your desk resembles a study aesthetic from social media. You're doing something, and that doing feels like progress. But then the exam arrives, and despite all those hours, the answers don't come. The questions look unfamiliar. Your carefully memorized definitions feel disconnected from what's being asked. This is the trap of surface-level thinking. You're building a house of cards, impressive to look at, but fragile under pressure. Memory without meaning is like trying to hold water in your hands. You can gather it momentarily, but it slips away the moment you're distracted, tired, or faced with a question phrased differently than expected. The uncomfortable truth? This kind of studying is boring, because your brain knows it's not really learning. It's just copying and pasting information like a computer hard drive. Your mind craves connection, context, meaning. When you deny it these things, studying becomes torture. So, if you've ever thought studying was inherently painful, maybe it's not you. Maybe you've just been thinking at the wrong level. Asterisk, asterisk. The second floor. When light begins to dawn, asterisk, asterisk. One floor up, something shifts. This is where memorization transforms into comprehension. Two students can read the same textbook page, but they're having completely different mental experiences. The first reads to remember, trying to burn words into memory. The second reads to understand, pausing to ask, what does this actually mean? How does this connect to what I just learned? What's the underlying logic here? This subtle shift changes everything. Let's say you're studying Newton's first law. Objects in motion stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force. The ground floor thinker memorizes this sentence word for word and recites it perfectly. The second floor thinker reads it and thinks, so, nothing starts or stops moving on its own. Something must push or pull it. That's why a rolling ball eventually stops. Friction is acting on it. That's why I need to keep pedaling my bike. See the difference? One stores words, the other builds understanding. And when you reach this level, you can explain things, describe processes, outline causes. This is where most students feel they've arrived. They understand the material, so they stop climbing. But understanding is just the beginning. The questions that separate good students from exceptional ones exist several floors higher. Asterisk, asterisk. The third floor, where theory meets reality, asterisk, asterisk. Now you've moved from knowing about something to doing something with it. You've memorized the formula. You've understood the concept. But can you use it? This floor is about application. Turning abstract knowledge into practical problem solving. In mathematics, it's using the quadratic formula to solve an equation. In chemistry, it's balancing a reaction. In language, it's constructing grammatically correct sentences. This feels like real progress because now you can do something, not just talk about it. You complete homework problems. You work through practice exercises. But here's the limitation. These are predictable problems. The textbook taught you how to calculate the area of a circle, and the homework asks you to calculate the area of a circle. You're following a recipe, not creating one. You know which tool to use because the question essentially tells you. Then, the exam presents something different. A car accelerates from rest to 60 kilometers per hour in 8 seconds. If it continues at that acceleration, how far will it travel in the next 5 seconds? Suddenly, you're stuck. This isn't a one-to-one problem anymore. You need to combine multiple concepts, think strategically about which formula to use first. The path isn't obvious, and that's when most students hit their first real wall. Asterisk, asterisk. The fourth floor, where patterns emerge. Asterisk, asterisk. Welcome to the altitude, where most students face their greatest challenge. Here, you're no longer looking at information in isolation. You're comparing, contrasting, finding patterns and relationships. You're asking, how is this similar to that? What happens when I change one variable? What's the relationship between these concepts? Questions at this level sound different. Compare the causes of World War I and World War II. What are the similarities and differences between mitosis and meiosis? How does Keynesian economics differ from classical economics? These questions don't ask you to know things, they ask you to see connections between things. And here's where it gets interesting. This thinking feels harder. You can't pull a single fact from memory and call it done. You stare at your notes for 5 minutes trying to understand how two concepts relate. You draw diagrams, create tables, construct Venn diagrams. You might study for an hour and only cover 2 pages. You look at the clock and think, this is taking too long. I must be doing something wrong. So you retreat to what feels easier, back to understanding or practicing straightforward problems. But here's what you need to know. That difficulty isn't a sign of failure, it's a sign of growth. Your brain is forming deeper neural connections. Scientists call this the misinterpreted effort hypothesis. When learning feels hard, we assume we're bad at it. But actually, that difficulty indicates you're learning at a higher level. Easy learning creates weak memory. Difficult learning creates strong memory. Think about it. When you effortlessly reread your notes for the 10th time, your brain is coasting. Nothing is being built. But when you're struggling to compare two complex concepts, your brain is firing on all cylinders, constructing mental architecture that will last. The students who push through this discomfort are the ones who start standing out. They're the ones professors notice. They're the ones getting top marks. Asterisk, asterisk. The 5th floor, where judgment resides. Asterisk. Now we've reached the altitude where exceptional students live. 1 floor down, you analyzed, you compared, and contrasted. But now you ask the next question. So what? Why does this matter? Which option is better, and why? What's the most important factor here? This floor is about judgment, forming conclusions, making decisions, prioritizing, justifying your choices. Let me show you the difference. A 4th floor biology question might ask, compare aerobic and anaerobic respiration. You'd explain that aerobic uses oxygen and produces more energy, while anaerobic doesn't and produces less. But a 5th floor question asks, a marathon runner trains at high altitude for several weeks before a race. Evaluate whether this is an effective strategy and justify your answer. Now, you're not just comparing concepts, you're using that comparison to make a judgment. You're weighing factors like oxygen availability, red blood cell production, muscle adaptation. You're considering pros and cons, you're reaching a conclusion and defending it. These are the questions that separate good students from exceptional ones. They require you to jump between your textbook notes and lectures, connecting dots that aren't obvious, thinking about implications and consequences. It's messy, it's mentally exhausting, it takes time, but this is where mastery lives. Because when you can evaluate, prioritize, and justify, you're not just regurgitating information or applying formulas. You're thinking like an expert in the field. Doctors don't just know diseases, they evaluate which diagnosis is most likely. Lawyers don't just know laws, they evaluate which argument is strongest. Engineers don't just know physics, they evaluate which design solution is best. And here's what's fascinating. When you train yourself to think at this level, something unexpected happens. You start retaining information better. You understand concepts deeper. You solve problems faster because your brain isn't storing isolated facts anymore. It's building a web of interconnected knowledge with priorities, relationships, and meaning. Asterisk, asterisk. The sixth floor. The Creative Summit. Asterisk, asterisk. There's one more level, though most will never need to reach it. This is where you're not just using knowledge, you're generating new knowledge. You're forming hypotheses, synthesizing ideas that don't exist yet in your materials, identifying gaps in current understanding, and creating potential answers. A question at this altitude might be, based on current climate data and economic trends, propose a novel policy framework that could reduce carbon emissions without negatively impacting developing economies. Justify your proposal with evidence and anticipate potential criticisms. This isn't analyzing or evaluating existing information. This is creating something new. These are the questions found in PhD programs, research roles, innovation-driven careers. The questions that lead to published papers, new theories, breakthrough innovations. But here's the truth. If you can master the fifth floor, if you can evaluate and prioritize consistently, you're already at the top of your game, already outperforming 90% of students, already thinking at a level that will serve you well in almost any career. The sixth floor is for those who want to push the boundaries of knowledge itself. Asterisk, asterisk. The backwards secret. Why? Starting at the top changes everything. Asterisk, asterisk. Now here's where everything you've been told about learning gets turned upside down. Common wisdom says you should start at the bottom and work your way up. First memorize everything, then understand it, then practice applying it, then compare things, and finally, after all that groundwork, start evaluating. It sounds logical, right? Build the foundation first, then construct the upper floors. But there's a problem. It doesn't work, and the reason why reveals something profound about how memory actually functions. In 1885, a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that humans forget approximately 50% of new information within 1 hour. Within 24 hours, about 70% disappears. So here's what happens when you try climbing from bottom to top. Week 1, you spend hours memorizing definitions at the ground floor. Week 2, you move to understanding those concepts. But while you're doing that, your brain has already forgotten half of what you memorized last week. Week 3, you try to apply those concepts, but now you've forgotten most of the ground floor and parts of the second floor. Week 4, you attempt to analyze and compare, but you're spending more time going back to relearn than actually working at this level. By the time you try to reach the fifth floor, you're exhausted and out of time. Instead of climbing up, you're constantly going back down to relearn what you forgot. You're stuck in a loop, always starting over, never reaching the top. By exam day, you're nowhere near evaluation level. You're scrambling just to remember the basics. This is why cramming doesn't work. This is why students can study for hours and still feel unprepared. So here's the better way, the secret that changes everything. Don't start at the ground floor. Start at the fifth floor. Your first reaction might be, how can I start at the top when I don't even know the material yet? But here's the key insight. Your brain forms stronger memory when you think at higher levels. When you force yourself to evaluate, compare, and prioritize from the start, your brain automatically fills in the lower levels as a natural consequence. Think about it. If you're trying to evaluate which concept is more important, you have to understand what each concept means. You can't evaluate something you don't understand. If you're trying to compare two ideas, you have to remember the details of each one. You can't compare what you don't remember. But it doesn't work the other way around. Memorization doesn't automatically lead to judgment. Understanding doesn't automatically lead to evaluation. So when you start at the fifth floor, you're forcing your brain to engage at the highest level, and everything below comes along for the ride. You remember better because you need to remember in order to evaluate. You understand deeper because evaluation requires understanding. You solve problems faster because you've been thinking strategically about which concepts matter most. Asterisk, asterisk. The practical revolution, thinking from the top down. Asterisk, asterisk. Let me show you how this works in practice. Imagine you're studying the French Revolution. The traditional bottom-up approach would be memorize dates, names, and events. The Bastille fell in 1789. Robespierre led the Reign of Terror. Napoleon came to power in 1799. Then understand what caused the revolution: economic crisis, social inequality, Enlightenment ideas. Then apply this knowledge to answer basic questions. Then compare it to other revolutions. Finally, evaluate which factor was most significant. But here's the top-down approach. You start by asking, if I had to identify the single most important cause of the French Revolution, what would it be and why? Now, to answer that question, you need to know what the causes were. So you research them, you understand them, you've automatically moved through the lower floors. Then you realize you need to compare the different causes to figure out which was most important. So you analyze them. You've automatically engaged the fourth floor. And because you're constantly asking yourself which matters most, you're remembering the details better. You're understanding the connections deeper. See how that works? By starting at the fifth floor, you've pulled yourself through all the lower levels, but you did it with purpose, direction, and meaning. That's why the knowledge sticks. Asterisk, asterisk. 4 practices that transform how you study, asterisk, asterisk. First, ask, so what? Constantly. Every time you learn something new, immediately ask yourself, why does this matter? How does this connect to everything else I know? Which idea is more important, this one or the one I just learned? Don't passively consume information. Interrogate it. When you read that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, ask, so what? Why does that matter? What would happen if cells didn't have mitochondria? Is this more important than the nucleus? Second, create your own exam questions at the highest levels. Ask yourself, or use AI tools to generate, give me evaluation questions for this topic. These are the exact types of questions your professors think about when writing exams. Professors follow frameworks to create questions that test different levels of thinking. The questions that separate excellent students from average ones exist at the 4th and 5th floors. Practice those from the beginning, and you're already thinking at the level the exam will test. Third, use techniques that force evaluation. Build mind maps, but constantly ask which connection is more important, which relationship is cause, and which is effect. Teach someone else, but focus on explaining why things matter, why one approach is better than another, what the implications are. Answer essay questions even if your exam is multiple choice. Force yourself to write out answers that require you to justify your thinking. Fourth, embrace the discomfort. If thinking at the 5th floor feels hard, that's the point. When you feel mental strain, when you're thinking slower, when you feel frustrated that you can't breeze through material, that's not failure. That's your brain building stronger neural pathways. That's memory forming deeper connections. Mental effort is a signal that you're learning at a level that will actually stick. Don't run from difficulty. Lean into it. Most students flee when things get hard, thinking they're doing something wrong. But students who reach the top recognize that feeling and think, this is hard. That means it's working. Asterisk, asterisk. The real difference. Asterisk, asterisk. So here's the truth that changes everything. The difference between average students and exceptional students isn't talent. It's not IQ. It's not even how many hours they study. It's how they think. Most students are stuck at the first 3 floors. Memorizing, understanding, applying. They're working hard, but they're working at the wrong altitude. But the students who reach the top are thinking from the 5th floor from day 1. They're evaluating, prioritizing, connecting ideas in ways others don't. They're asking, so what? When others are just asking what? They're forming judgments when others are collecting facts. And the secret? You don't have to climb the building 1 floor at a time. You can start at the top and let everything else fall into place. Because when you think at the 5th floor, your brain automatically handles the lower floors as a natural consequence. You remember better because evaluation requires memory. You understand deeper because evaluation requires understanding. You solve problems faster because evaluation requires strategic thinking. It's not magic. It's just how the brain works when you give it a meaningful challenge. So here's your challenge. The next time you sit down to study, don't ask yourself what you need to remember. Don't even ask what you need to understand. Ask yourself, what's the most important concept here, and why? Force yourself into 5th floor thinking from the very first moment. And watch how everything else, the memory, the understanding, the problem solving, becomes easier. Not because the material got simpler, but because your brain is finally working at the level it was designed for. Your brain doesn't want to memorize random facts. It wants to make sense of the world. It wants to form judgments, prioritize, and evaluate. When you deny it that by staying on the lower floors, studying feels like torture. But when you give it what it craves, meaningful thinking at the highest levels, studying becomes engaging, challenging in a good way, the kind of work that leaves you tired but satisfied. The students who think deeper are the ones who rise higher, and that difference can begin right now.